Welcome to Trust Talk. Our guest today is Tina Øllgaard Bentzen, a researcher at Roskilde University in Denmark, specializing in the intersection of trust and control. In this episode, we delve into the Scandinavian concept of trust-based management, exploring how it balances autonomy and accountability in public organizations. Tina shares how trust can act as a catalyst for innovation and collaboration, while addressing the challenges of creating trust-supportive cultures. From examples in Denmark's municipalities to lessons that leaders across Europe can apply, we uncover the nuances of building trust in complex environments. Join us for an insightful discussion on trust as a transformative force in organizational leadership. Your host, Severin DeWitt.
Tina, welcome to Trust Talk. On the website of the university where you teach, Roskilde in Denmark, it says that your research focuses on the interaction between trust and control. In my earlier interview with Sim Sitkin, I'm sure you know him, he discusses how formal and informal control mechanisms can influence trust. He challenges traditional views that control reduces trust, arguing instead that well-designed systems can enhance trust by reducing friction and creating common ground. Would you agree with him?
Yes, absolutely. I think when I first started researching trust-based forms of governance, that was probably the biggest revelation for me, that strengthening trust is not necessarily about reducing control. And I think it makes sense when you look at Scandinavia, which is such a high trust corner of the world, but also a really highly regulated society with lots of control that ensures stability and accountability. So I think in my studies of public organizations actively trying to build trust with employees, it's been most intriguing to see how they deal with problems of control. And I think we intuitively expect trust-based leadership to be about removing control. However, most of the time, it's really about redesigning or re-anchoring control so it is perceived as more supportive and meaningful. And I think as a leader, there's a really good learning from that. We know that involving employees in questions of how control is carried out allows them to take ownership and internalize control in ways that often makes it feel more supportive. In example, here in Denmark, we have some really interesting and positive results of inviting employees to co-create the supervision system that they are later exposed to.
Your research often highlights trust-based management as an alternative to traditional management theories. And I think you call it new public management. Can you explain what trust-based management or TBM is and why it's gaining traction, especially in Scandinavia?
Yes, it's true that trust-based management is often seen as a counter-movement to new public management, and that is because it advocates strong trust relations as a basis of delegating autonomy to employees. So it's rather about building trust than implementing very detailed control measures and high power distances in organizations. I think new public management also assumes that public employees are predominantly motivated by extrinsic rewards and tend to be self-serving. But when we talk about trust-based management, it very much assumes that public employees are, at least to a large extent, very driven by intrinsic and pro-social motives. And that's a huge difference when we contemplate how much trust we can give public employees, because we get overlapping intentions between the organization and the public employee.
In one of your studies, you called trust a magic concept. What makes trust so special and useful in so many situations? Can you share how it can lead to real changes, like improving how public organizations work?
So magic concepts are these very abstract, positive, and extremely popular concepts that seem to be spreading from organization to organization, much like a fashion, you could say. And I think even in Scandinavia, we can say that this magic concept is spreading also for country to country. So basically what we see is that trust has been diffused and adopted as an agenda or a reform across Denmark and Sweden and Norway. And we know from research that such magic concepts can be tricky because they are so generic and pretty abstract, and that can make them hard to operationalize. But we also know that using trust as a kind of lens to reflect on and debate on the organizational practices can provide important opportunities for change. So in a recent study I did of 2 municipalities, we did find that trust can be used to look critically at existing practices to see which are in line with ideas of trust and which need to be changed. Similarly, we also saw the organizational actors use trust to find inspiration in other organizations, which are experimenting with new practices which could help elevate trust. So, in example, in a Danish municipality, we've seen that they use trust as an argument for discarding a purchaser-provider model. And instead, they use trust as an argument for developing a new form of control.
So building on that, what key lessons from the Scandinavian approach to trust could other European countries apply in business or in even political settings?
Yes, it is true that the Nordic countries are ranked high in terms of both general and institutional trust. As such, it's really interesting, I think, that these trust reforms are getting such leverage. You could say that since it's a high trust corner of the world, why do we need trust reforms? But I think apparently having been used to trust also make people react when trust is threatened. I like to think that the trust reforms are also a sign that the Nordic countries are trying to protect the trust that they feel is a core value in their lives. So part of the trust reforms are so-called governance experiments in which organizations are set free of previous regulations. In Denmark, we've had several rounds of such liberation experiments, which have also been elevated quite ambitiously. Generally speaking, the evaluations show that such liberations either lead to the same or more positive results. So it appears that it does not create worse results, at least. Positive outcomes are both higher employee engagement, and we also see a lot of examples of better services for citizens and reduced administrative burdens.
Sounds good. You've mentioned that giving employees more freedom can sometimes feel like a poisoned chalice, something that seems beneficial at first but comes with hidden challenges or negative consequences. Can you share a real-world example where the tricky balance between giving autonomy and maintaining control was handled successfully?
Yes, I think this is a really important issue because trust sounds so positive, but I think for some employees it can also be a burden to carry the responsibility of trust. And I think across all the studies I've been privileged to follow, there are tensions to be handled between autonomy and accountability. So I think successful leaders, in terms of actually managing to lead trust-based, are aware that trust is not blind and should not be blind. It's very much about assessing how mature the organization is in terms of being able and willing to live up to trust. So there's an important finding that has to do with leaders continuously being ready to spot and repair breaches of trust before they actually escalate trust. So a really tough part of trust-based leadership is being ready to intervene if an employee is not able to navigate the complex levels of autonomy. And I think usually training and supporting is enough to actually get people on track again. But I also talked to quite a few leaders underlining that when you are leading trust-based, you also need to be able to acknowledge that sometimes you have employees that are not really able to navigate in this kind of trust-based setting. So we also have examples of leaders replacing or even firing employees that do not fit into this very loose and autonomous structure. So this is a real ethical dilemma that it comes with trust-based leadership.
You write about the connection between institutional and personal trust. Is it possible for people, for managers or even politicians to address trust issues on both levels at the same time?
Yes, I have actually seen several examples of that. For example, I've been following quite a few examples of organizations inviting employees to co-create or design new forms of control that are supposed to be more trust supportive. And I think working together on how to shape these control systems can actually be a really good opportunity to build trust. At least we've seen that that can be an outcome of such processes. That can be control systems like supervision or documentation tools. It can also be budgetary tools. And by collaborating over time on how to build trust supportive structures, you can actually build more relations and enhance trust between, in example, the administration at the local level of an organization.
Trust is often seen as a catalyst for innovation. Can you share an example from a Nordic country where fostering trust within a team or organization has directly led to creative or groundbreaking solutions?
I think perhaps we have more examples of adaptations and ongoing development more than groundbreaking, completely new innovative solutions. So one example is from a municipality where they've been leading more trust-based, providing more autonomy for the frontline workers. And that actually spurred a debate about how they provide their welfare services for elderly citizens. One of the problems that they were addressing was that a lot of the elderly met so many of the employees because there were always like a stream of people coming to their homes. And that was frustrating for a lot of people because they didn't really get to know these employees very well. So they started reorganizing the services so that they had smaller teams of the same employees meeting up in the home of the citizens. And that actually made a huge difference when you measured the satisfaction of these users with the services.
So, where do you see trust-based reforms heading in the next, say, decade? Are there new challenges or opportunities emerging that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think we're navigating a time with several challenges, which are both reasons to engage in trust-based reforms, but which can also be like a real challenge when we attempt to realize them. I think in Denmark and as in many other countries, we are facing fiscal pressure. We also have a problem with getting competent professionals and retaining them in organizations. And that can create a situation in which trust is given on very hard conditions. An example, if employees are given extensive autonomy with very few resources and perhaps colleagues which are not really fit to handle the complexity that comes with trust, it can become a stressful burden. And we also see empirical examples of this in Denmark, that when you use trust-based leadership without really having the foundation or the resources needed, it can really create problems with stress among employees. On the other hand, I think, for example, the COVID crisis has showed us how important trust is in times of turbulence. In Denmark, we saw a very clear pattern of granting employees even more trust during the crisis. And that allowed for some really interesting, innovative solutions like outdoor teaching, online schooling, and many other new ways of providing welfare services under restrained conditions. So I think investing in building trust is becoming increasingly more important.
In one of your articles, you use the metaphor of the bird cage. You write, I think, the bird cage is open, but will the bird fly? To describe the challenges of fostering trust and autonomy in public organizations. If you were to revisit this metaphor today, do you believe more organizations have succeeded in helping the bird to fly? What lessons stand out for leaders trying to strike the right balance between offering autonomy and ensuring support?
Yes, I remember vividly this leader telling me that it's no use to open the bird cage if the bird is not willing to fly. And I think it's been such an important quote for my research because it really made me realize that at that point, the trust reform in Denmark was very much about creating more autonomy by reducing control. And empirically, I saw quite a few examples of employees finding it very hard to navigate this autonomy, actually trying to avoid getting the trust that somebody was trying to give to them. So I think when I look at the public sector in Denmark today, I actually do see a different level of consciousness about, yes, that we do need, of course, to evaluate whether our regulation and systems of control are adequate to allow for trust to grow. But there is also a realization that trust reforms are very much about building relations and about creating the safety and the competence for actually navigating more autonomy. So it is very much about creating good conditions for nurturing trust with employees and preparing them for, so to speak, spreading their wings. And I think if I were to give some advice for leaders in other countries contemplating whether to engage in this, I would say that some of my new studies that are not yet published suggest that perhaps creating a trust-supportive culture is even more vital than opening the birdcage. Because we do see examples of leaders in highly regulated organizations that are really restrained in terms of changing dysfunctional control, but that still manage to build trust primarily by nurturing a trust-supportive culture. So I think the real advice is there is something that can be done almost in any setting that you are a leader.
Tina, we have come to the end of the interview. It was short and forceful, so to say. Thank you very much for being our guest today, and I wish you good luck with your further research in trust. You just mentioned that you are about to publish new research results, so I'm sure that many people will like to follow that and hear more about it. Wish you all the best, and thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much for the invitation to participate.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Trust Talk. We hope that you found the conversation valuable and informative. At Trust Talk, we believe in the power of trust to create positive change in the world. If you believe in our mission, we would greatly appreciate your support. You can help keep Trust Talk going by making a donation on our website at trusttalk.co/donate. Every contribution, no matter how small, helps us to continue bringing you thoughtful and engaging podcasts. Thank you for your support and for listening to Trust Talk. We look forward to meeting you again for future episodes.